The story of Joshua Glover.
There are indeed but few events upon record in the history of the United States between the Revolution and the Rebellion that stirred the public mind more deeply, brought into question a more important principle, or raised the populace to a more dangerous frenzy than the never-to-be-forgotten Glover Rescue and the war upon S.M. Booth, the main instigator of said rescue.
A very important part of Racine's early history was the fact that it was an abolitionist community, a very strong abolitionist community. In fact, at one point, a runaway slave named Joshua Glover, who was living in the area, was kidnapped and taken to Milwaukee to be sent back to his owner in the South. And a group of about 100 Racine citizens got together, and they went up to Milwaukee and broke him out of jail and managed to get him to Canada.
Co-authors Ruby West Jackson, formerly of Racine, and Walter T. McDonald, presently of Racine, have just released their new book called Finding Freedom, The Untold Story of Joshua Glover. On June 15, 2007, the authors were joined at Martha Merrill's bookstore by public radio celebrity Greg Berg to read from their book and retell the most dramatic sagas of Joshua Glover's life.
It was New Year's Day, 1850. Joshua stood among the other men, women, and children who were to be offered for sale from the steps of the St. Louis courthouse at this auction of human property. The cold wind blowing off the Mississippi River nearby chilled their ill-clad bodies. They waited their turn to be poked, prodded, and examined by the auctioneer and prospective buyers. A large number of St. Louis slave owners and onlookers surrounded the east side of the brick building where the annual New Year's auction would shortly take place. For those about to be sold, it was the most dreadful days, filled with deep sorrow and fear to the point of terror, as they contemplated the separation from their families that was imminent for some. Husbands and wives pulled from each other's embrace and begging and pleading not to be split up. Infants snatched from their mother's breast as the milk still lingered on their lips. Milk that would soon be used to nurse and nourish his new master. When Joshua was stripped, the crowd could see that there were no marks on his back. When told to describe his skills, he would have been honest to say how much strength he had and stamina and the long hours of work that he could do.
Joshua was purchased by Benjamin Stone Garland of St. Louis.
He arranged for Joshua to be sent to the farm. When Joshua arrived there, he found a 300-acre farm under cultivation, run by Garland's half-dozen slaves. Glover himself was the elder male. He worked there for 2 years, give or take, but on this day, he decided that he no longer wished to be a slave of Garland or of anybody else, and he left. And he headed for parts north. When Garland got back in town and found that his purchase was absent without leave, he had a notice put in the St. Louis Republican, the daily paper. $200 reward, read the headline in it. Ran away from the subscriber, living 4 miles west of the city of St. Louis on Saturday night last. A Negro man by the name of Joshua, about 38 or 40 years of age, about 6 feet high, spare, with long legs and short body. But he did eventually end up in Racine sometime in the late spring, early summer probably of 1854, and worked for 2 years at a sawmill that is at the site right now of what used to be the Days Inn Motel up on Rapids Drive. He was playing cards in the cabin, and there came a sharp rap on the door. The friend leaped up, and Glover cried out, "Don't open the door till we know who's there." And he did this because there had been rumors in town for a week or more of slave catchers being around, so that he had special reason to be fearful. His so-called friend, ignoring that, yanked open the door, and in came the capture party.
A slave owner named Garland obtained a guide at Racine who directed him to the place where Glover was staying, and he was arrested as a runaway slave from St. Louis. In making the arrest, Glover was frightfully abused and mistreated, although it was declared by eyewitnesses that he made no resistance whatever. He was thrown into a wagon, half conscious and bleeding, and was brought at once to Milwaukee, March 11, 1854. At 9:00 a.m., Mr. Booth received a telegram from the mayor of Racine that a Negro named Joshua Glover had been kidnapped near that city by Deputy Marshal Cotton the night previous, and asking him if a warrant had been issued for that purpose. On inquiry, Marshal Cotton denied all knowledge of the transaction, but Judge Miller, a pro-slavery United States judge of the first water, said there had been a warrant issued, and no doubt he would be brought before him for examination. The judge expatiated on the liability of the marshal should the slave escape, and hoped there would be no excitement. Mr. Booth saw the judge and said, "We want a fair and open trial for the fugitive slave, and that he be permitted to have counsel." Mr. Booth soon learned that Glover had arrived in Milwaukee and was in the county jail, all bruised and bloody, and bore marks of the most inhuman and brutal treatment. He at once obtained a saddle horse and rode up and down the street, crying at the top of his voice, "Ho, to the rescue! Ho, to the rescue!" Of course, the people became excited and inquired what was the trouble, that so much noise should be made on the streets, and on explanation of the cause, became more excited and immediately repaired to the jail to see for themselves what was going on, and to prevent, if possible, the spiriting away of a colored man, Glover, without a legal hearing. In the meantime, Mr. Booth had returned to the jail with some 500 citizens. By 5:00 p.m., 100 delegates from Racine arrived, headed by the sheriff of the county with a warrant for the arrest of Garland and United States Marshal Cotton for assault and battery on Glover. They landed at the steamboat wharf and marched to the county jail. The bells were ringing, and the people assembled in large numbers. Mr. Booth explained to the Racine delegation what had been done and denounced the Fugitive Slave Act, but he cautioned the people against violence. Mr. Booth made his announcement publicly when the crowd made a rush for the jail. On arriving there, a demand was made for the keys of the jail of the undersheriff of the jail, S.S. Conover, but the request was denied, whereupon about 20 strong and resolute men seized a large timber some 8 or 10 inches square and 20 feet long, and went for the jail door. Bum, bum, and down came the jail door, and out came Glover. About this time, the United States Marshal made his appearance upon the scene, and a rescue was attempted from those who had Glover in their possession, and for about 20 minutes or half an hour, the devil was to pay. Glover was well kept in hand by his rescuers from the jail to Wisconsin Street, about 1,000 people following in the wake. Sometimes it seemed as though the marshal and sheriff's posse would rescue him from the angry populace, but on they went from Wisconsin Street to East Water Street and down East Water Street to what was then called Walker's Point Bridge, while the crowd was constantly increasing. But the victory was for the rescuers. On arriving at the bridge, John A. Messenger, a Democrat, came along and wanted to know what was up. What was this large crowd in search of, was his inquiry. After being told, he said, "Put that man into my buggy," and no quicker said than done, and away he went with the whole posse of the United States government in his wake. But he had a fleet and strong horse. He took a westerly course out of the city towards Waukesha, but he meandered on several roads here and there, so that the slave hunters on his track gave up the chase and exclaimed, "Lost, lost, lost."
And the world will live